Shall we play a game?
We got Star Wars Unlimited. We got classic Star Wars games. We got old school D&D, independent RPGs, mini painting, Warhammer, of course, tons of other games. But first, we're gonna need some coffee here on Board Barista Productions. Hey everybody, it's your Board Barista Fen. With me is
Tanya.
And this is Retro Reviews, a review show where we go through my copious collection of D&D books, paraphernalia, magazines, other RPGs, and gaming stuff, one at a time. And to keep me, well, not to keep me from rambling, because Tanya is great at going down these rabbit holes with me. So to keep us company, so it's just not me talking all the time, we have Tanya. All right. So this week we are doing Dragon Magazine number 315. Theme for this issue is classic campaign worlds. So quick quiz of your D&D knowledge. Who is that on the cover of this magazine?
Outside of Dracula? I don't know.
Oh, that is Strahd.
Lestrade?
No, not Lestrade.
Okay.
Strahd. It's Strahd.
Strahd.
Yes. The classic villain of the Ravenloft campaign setting, which we'll be talking about in a moment.
Ravenloft, I have heard of.
Yes. So you probably have heard of a few of these worlds, these campaign settings, but you probably haven't heard of all of them. No, the magazine differs from its normal format. There's no up on a soapbox to start off the issue, so which is really sad because they could have tied it in with one of the settings we'll talk about in a minute. We could have let the man who created it talk for himself, but no. Guy Gax doesn't get an article this issue. We start off with the honorable mentions, the campaign settings that could not be talked about. Or they didn't have time to talk about. That starts off with Conan. So, Conan, the Conan RPG at this time, in 2004 was actually being done by Mongoose Publishing, but originally D&D had the rights back in the day. That's why the Conan Pantheon of Gods was in one of the original deities and demigods books. Another one they couldn't talk about was Lankmire, which is the setting for Fitz Leiber's books and stories about Fehard and the Grey Mouser, which I actually read the first story of that recently. That was a really good read. A thief that's actually named like the Grey Mouser, like the gray cat. So I'm like, ooh, that's cool. The next setting was the Horde. It was meant to be a bridge between two of the other settings. It was designed to bridge the Forgotten Realms setting with the Oriental campaign setting. So it was very much a Mongol Ottoman Empire kind of theme and desert situation, kind of like the mirroring the Silk Road of Earth history. There was the Council of Worms, which was a mini campaign setting used to be plugged into different other campaign settings, where there was an island that was ruled by dragons. The Spelljammer campaign setting is not going to be mentioned in this book. They do make a note of it that they covered it in Dungeon Magazine number 92, which I think I've reviewed earlier on this channel, back when Laura was still co-hosting. And it really wouldn't be until 5th edition when we got a true like Spelljammer release for D&D. They kind of didn't really put it out in 2nd and 3rd edition. So it had like from 2nd edition to 5th edition, Spelljammer was like, we don't talk about Spelljammer because it was one of the most divisive. It's like, we have spaceships traveling between the planes. It's like, okay, and giant sentient hamsters. It's like all of the weird stuff was in that setting. Well, actually, not all the weird stuff. We got some weird stuff that actually they decided to dive into. Jack Endor was a setting of barbarians versus wizards on islands. It's like another little mini campaign setting. Tale of the Comet. I wish they would have done this because it kind of springboards off of one of my favorite classic AD&D adventures, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which has the crashed UFO up in the mountains that you get to go into and explore. Tale of the Comet was an alien invasion of the fantasy D&D world. I'm like, I love that. I love me some sci-fi in my fantasy. Diablo 2 is not being covered in this. They actually did Diablo 2 for 2nd edition D&D, but it came out when they were starting the big the big jump from 2nd to 3rd edition. So it kind of like was there, but it got pushed to the side and kind of forgotten about by everybody. And Warcraft. That's right. The World of Warcraft, Wizards of the Coast had the rights to be able to do a D&D World of Warcraft rules, but it sat in production limbo for so long that by the time that they were ready to pull the trigger on it, the rights had been pulled back by Blizzard and given to White Wolf. So those are the honorable mentions. Diving into it, of course, we're starting right off with Strahd, the Ravenloft campaign setting. So each of these articles gives you a little brief history of the setting. So Ravenloft was the gothic horror. The monsters are in control. It was definitely had like a lot of vibes of the Universal Picture monsters and Hammer horror. With classic old 60s, 70s horror vibe to the setting. It was actually different little kingdoms that were all broken up and ruled by different powerful monsters. Strahd was the stand-in for Dracula. So we actually have stats for Strahd, plus a map of his castle in this article. There's 2 sets of stats. One is a direct 2nd edition to 3rd edition translation, which put Strahd at like level 12. And then there was the actual this is what Strahd should be in 3.5. He should be an 18th level monster. Next campaign setting they talked about was the Hollow World. This was part of the Mysteria campaign setting, which basically was the basic edition of D&D that used the original D&D rules, where you didn't really have a lot of classes. Like if you were an elf, that was your class. You didn't have a class and a race in old school D&D. So the Hollow World, the world of Mysteria was actually hollow on the inside, and you could get to it and do this whole campaign adventure, kind of like the Hollow Earth stories from like Journey to the Center of the Earth and some of the Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff.
Yep.
And in this setting, beings could be infused with dinosaur traits. They develop scales and have like bite attacks and stuff like that. So you can have, there's rules for making dino people in the article.
Yeah, it's definitely an article to use.
Oh yeah. The 4th article in the book, the 2nd setting they talk about is the Forgotten Realms. And I just have to ask, why? Why dedicate a couple pages out of this magazine to the Forgotten Realms? Because Forgotten Realms at this time period and since has been the main D&D setting. Like that is everything they put out for adventures and modules and supplements. It's all like, it takes place in the Forgotten Realms. And it's been current since 3rd edition. It's not a classic setting. Still, there's a prestige class for good drow protecting knights. So in the Drizzt and other drows that come up to the surface, there's actually an order of knights that go out and like, we're going to protect you and we're going to make you a functioning member of society. And I'm like, yeah, this article is goofy. And I'll say it's a little bit of a waste.
Wasn't that what we were kind of doing to our drow that was originally part of our first campaign?
Pretty much. We were protecting and socializing.
Getting you socialized. Yeah.
The next setting is Dark Sun, and I need to do a little bit of a retraction. I always call Dark Sun as being like the Arabic-inspired campaign setting. I'm wrong. It is desert themed, but the big thing about Dark Sun is there's hardly any life on the planet, and how magic is fueled in Dark Sun is you have to siphon the life force out of something or someone or yourself in order to power magic. So basically a lot of wizards and clerics are all evil because they're siphoning life in order to actually use powers. So there's like a whole rule system they printed that so you could do Dark Sun style magic in 3rd edition. Talatis. So you know about the Dragonlance campaign setting? Did you ever read the Dragonlance books?
No, but it kind of sounds familiar.
Well, so basically it's like in the setting, dragons have disappeared for a really long time. They finally come back. All the gods have left, so there's no true clerics anymore when the game starts. And the whole adventuring of it is like trying to find the true gods, and the dragons come back, and they have to figure out how to make the mythical weapon to kill dragons called the Dragonlance. It is classic, straight up. If you played D&D in the like early 90s, you read these books. It's Dragons of Autumn, Twilight, Dragons of Winter something, and Dragons of Spring something or other. I can't remember what the titles were. Autumn Twilight is a movie. It is online. You can watch it. It's animated.
I want to say I've watched that.
You've seen that movie, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the theory of it sounds so familiar, but I remember it being an animation.
It is. Dragonlance. The Dragonlance movie is an animation. They only made one because it kind of flopped, and they were like, because they did direct to video.
Yeah.
And it flopped, and they never did the rest of the series. And it was like, oh, this would have been so good.
I want to say it was something.
They had Keith Sutherland doing the voice of Rassilin. They had Lucy Lawless. You know, Xena herself was doing the cast of Gold Moon. Like they had an all-star cast for
the local movie theater called Movie Guys.
Yeah,
went in there and was like, I'm looking for something new, funky. This was early 2000s before they closed down, and they're like, well, tell us what you're into. So I ended up mentioning Raven's Loft, stuff like that. I didn't realize Raven's Loft, the website, was connected to D&D at the time, and he was like, you're gonna like this. And he handed he's like, it was $1 rental. That's how cheap it was at the time. And he's like, there you go. 1 week, $1 rental.
I bought the DVD and I still have it. So
sweet.
Yeah. So anyways, the world that Dragonlance takes place on is called Kryn. And for the Taladas campaign setting, they asked themselves, well, what's on the other side of the world? Because Kryn itself, where the Dragonlance stories take place, is just like one continent. And they were asking this question actually in the write-up. The write-ups on these are pretty cool. The write-up, they're actually talking about how like that question was asked at a bar while they were having lunch. And they went back and they brainstormed and they came up with the continent of Taladas as being the opposite side of the world of Kryn, where there are basically they're barbarian cleric gnomes who, instead of being tinkerer gnomes, they're all obsessed with death. So they are angry goth gnomes.
Tinker gnomes. They fix stuff. Ask him how you used to be able to become a bard.
That was covered in an earlier episode, but for side reference, you had to take like you had to take so many levels of fighter, so many levels of healer, and so many levels of cleric, and then you became a bard. You had to do multi-class into it. So back on topic, Taladas, you had angry goth gnomes and shark cultist that could actually turn into sharks.
Yeah, I see walking sharks.
Yeah. So that was some like really like that was definitely some like beer cheese and beer inspired. And it was one of the ones from the brainstorming section that actually made it to print. It's like,
nice.
Wow. And of course, we just talked about the Dragonlance setting, which was the next one up. They had actually released a bunch of Dragonlance 3rd edition books. I have one of them, Tower of High Sorcery. There's a review in the playlist of these episodes if you want to go check that out. One of the things they didn't put into that was how to play a certain kind of the it's the Bozak. They're dragon kin. So they're like humanoid dragons. Basically, they take a egg of a good dragon, they perform dark magic onto it, turn it evil, and make it humanoid. So they put the stats for that for the Bozak, which was the last of the 3 types, into this article. Next article is the Planescape, which is a big part of like Spelljammer. So it's the whole thing of like it's a whole adventure set in the astral realm. So you use like the spell jamming. You can use spell jamming in other ways to move around the astral plane, but you're not traveling between planes on plane. Well, Planescape was like taking place all across the multiverse, but it was using more of like dimensional portals than actually using the ships. And this article talks about the 6 factions that used to 6 of the 15 factions that used to rule the city of Sigil, which is like in the center of the astral plane, has doors that if you go through them properly, you can end up anywhere else in the multiverse. And these are the 6 evil outcast guilds that used to be part of running. So like the 6 evil bad guy organizations of the astral plane. Fun fact, Planescape actually was like some of the last adventures published for 2nd edition D&D tied into that, because there was the whole die Vecna die where they were going to kill Vecna, and Vecna's whole plan was to like establish himself as like the only god, and it caused like a whole shift. That campaign caused like all the shifts to like the higher planes in D&D, and some of these campaign settings merging with each other was all a result from a Planescape campaign. So,
Okay.
All right. Greyhawk comes in at our 8th classic campaign setting. This was Gary Gygax's personal setting. This is what when he sat down and wrote his adventures for D&D, he set them all in Greyhawk and focused primarily on his castle Greyhawk, of which there is no actual module for. Like, Gary took the secrets of Castle Greyhawk to his grave.
Now,
The dungeon for Castle Greyhawk.
which one came first? Greyhawk or Grayskull?
Greyhawk.
I kind of
Greyhawk.
wonder if it inspired Grayskull.
Because Castle Greyhawk came around in 74 when they were beta testing D&D, and Grayskull came out in like 82 when He-Man came out. So that means they were writing Grayskull in like 80, 81.
Could have been affected because it kind of runs along the lines of D&D.
Does. So the article they introduced, the mechanics they introduced from the Greyhawk setting, regional feats, like a feat, like special training that you would pick up from being like native or having lived in a certain region of the world for a certain period of time, or it's like it's an interesting way to like approach the whole thing of like people from this place are really good at this, instead of just being like you know a whole like added on to like a sub race or subclass, subspecies. You just be like, hey, I lived here long enough. I have access. I can pick up this feat and have trained because I went in this fishing village where I learned how to make really good sushi.
Okay.
It shows that, you know, it's a skill that you can pick up there, but not everybody from there is going to have. Next campaign setting, and this one, I almost bought this book in college. It's called The Ghost Walk. Basically, it's a campaign for after the party dies, or after a player or a character in the party dies. It has the rules for basically being able to play a ghost.
Ooh.
So your
Bad.
character in the setting of Ghost Walk, so when people die, their physical body just falls, their physical body dies, but their spirit sticks around and they can still interact with the material realm. And there's a evil guild cult of Orcus in that setting. They
Did you
basically
say
go through
Orcus?
Orcus, like the big demon with the orc's hat, with the round horns,
Oh,
ram
okay.
horns, and he's like part orc and he's got wings.
I thought you meant orcas, as in killer
Oh.
whales.
Orcus.
Orcas. Okay.
Yeah, so it's basically stats and notes about the guild, some powers. There's like a feat you can get for for performing a certain ritual, and there's a template you can put on non-skeletal undead to make them more of a challenge. Next setting is Terrakur. It was a setting created to use with Oriental Adventures. This was actually the one that was that they were going to have the horde be the gap, the link between Terrakur, Tour, and the Forgotten Realms. Since that time, Terrakur has been lumped into the Forgotten Realms. It's the Oriental. Well, I don't want to use that term. It's the Asian flavored part of the Forgotten Realms. So in this, we get notes on major kingdoms, again, some more regional feats and martial arts styles. Next campaign setting, we're going back to Mysteria to talk about a certain campaign setting from that world called Red Steel. So the Savage Coast, which is an area of Mysteria, there is a curse from a slain older god that basically anybody that spends too much time there becomes corrupted and mutated unless you are protected by a red glowing metal amulet made of the metal cinnabar. Not to be confused with cinnabuns. Cinnabar will protect you. Cinnabun will nourish you. And then when the metal's protective value has worn off, the steel itself is like really good at being enchanted. You get a 25% discount on experience points spent to create magical items with it. It's harder than mithril. But the most important, so they give you the stats for all of that stuff, but they also give you a stats for one of the playable races from the Savage Coast. My favorite non-human race to play in D&D, the Tortel.
I can see that. Why? If that's the character drawn at the beginning of the chapter.
Oh, yeah. That is and if you combine the Tortel with the Oriental Adventure setting, you can have, and if they're like very young in their starting age, and
Teenage
because they're
Mutant
from
Ninja
the
Turtle.
Savage Coast where there are mutants, they can be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Well, because actually Tortels are mutated turtles that took humanoid form, but because of the Savage Coast, but it's cool. The next setting is Birthright. So basically, the backstory for how this setting came about is they played a game of what's called Diplomacy, which is actually one of the games that inspired Dungeons and Dragons, where you basically role play out the game instead of actually like have miniature battles. Basically, you make a map of a world, and everybody gets a kingdom, and then you basically like maneuver politically with each other. You write down like your schemes and your stuff, and correspond it, and you send what you're doing and what you talk to with the other people, and what you're planning on actually doing to the DM. In letters, and then everybody does that, and then the DM will kind of like, okay, so this happens, and this happens, and updates and changes like what's going on in the world, posts the new updated map and statistics, and tells everybody, okay, what are you doing now? So that whole everybody takes their actions, does their thing, and then the DM, the game master, explaining to them what happens. That's the DNA from diplomacy that got into D&D. That at TSR, they were actually playing a fantasy-based diplomacy that inspired this whole thing of like, what if we had a campaign setting that was like that, where people were trying to become more powerful, and they had like the bloodlines of old heroes that used to fight for the gods when the gods had their big battle and killed each other, and people are descendant from like the demigods and the people that fought for the gods. So it's like all about like strengthening your bloodline and allying with other bloodlines to increase your bloodline score to get more powers. So there's this whole rules table about like, how do you develop a bloodline score? How do you improve it? And what happens if you have certain feats, what your bloodline score is. So it's like, it's kind of cool, but because a big part of it was based off of random percentile rolls for getting your starting bloodline score, it could be a little unbalanced unless you actually like set certain caps for players. But it was a cool little like add-on feature if you really wanted to care about all that kind of stuff and make the game a little bit more, chunky. Next campaign setting, this is the setting number 14 in the book, is Al-Qadim. This is the Arabian Nights setting. We have a variant wizard that gets a Jinn familiar. So not a genie, not a Genii, but a little elemental pet that's like a little firefox or water turtle or something like that has the ability to dimensionally travel. And you can send it, when you do the spell research, you send it out into the elemental planes to go find the spells that you need when you prepare your spells and stuff like that. You do get the ability to summon genies and Genii at higher levels. And at 13th level, you're actually able to make a genie prison. So you can actually make the bottle to put the genie in. And we get the stats for the Jinn familiars. So you can use them not just as being like a familiar type that people can summon, but you can actually have like basically little tiny Pokemon.
Okay.
They can dimensionally plane shift. Like you send it back. Oh my god! I gotta photocopy this, and I gotta send a copy of this issue to my friend Levi. He's wanted to do a Pokemon D&D thing for a while. I gotta send that to him. Next, setting number 15, which should have been, if they would have put these in chronological order, this would be setting number 1, because before there was Castle Greyhawk, before Gygax got his hands on D&D, somebody else was doing the work to make the game that we all love. And that was Dave Arneson and his Blackmoor setting. So, and Blackmoor was like one of the first of expansion books, along with Greyhawk. The two of them were the first supplemental books for the original box set, for the white box set. It's steeped in history. There's so much cool stuff that was in Blackmoor that I've discovered over the years from all the references and books that I've read on D&D history. So much cool stuff. There's like Expedition of Barrier Peaks and the comet thing that I talked about earlier. That stuff doesn't hold a candle because Blackmoor had like a version of the USS Enterprise that crash land on it. So you got like the Federation higher intelligent advanced race stranded. You have the Temple of the Frog, which is basically a bunch of people that were using like science to mutate themselves into frogs, and they had ray gun. There was so much sci-fi all throughout that. You had the premise for the D&D cartoon where a bunch of teenagers get sent to the D&D world that was actually first happened in Blackmore, where basically the players got sent back in time and to Blackmore, so they're college students adventuring in the D&D world. There was so much cool stuff. But they did Dave Arneson dirty in this magazine. They put it the 16th article in the magazine. Don't talk about any of the really cool genre bending stuff that he did with his campaign setting. Instead, we get an article that is a halfling monk prestige class. More monk shenanigans. I seriously am starting to get to the point where I see monk articles in these magazines, and I'm just like, why? How many martial arts styles do we need? Moving on. Articles. Setting number 16. I've talked about it a few times because they had some supplements for it in this magazine, little mini spotlights. But in general, Mysteria, the basic edition D&D box set, the black box, the red box that everyone's familiar with, the big black one that had the board game inside of it, all those basic old school D&D stuff, all were set in Mysteria. I know that Josh's favorite monster in D&D, the Topi, is from that setting. They're little tiny mummies on speed. Remember the scene in the second Mummy movie where they had the mummies that were running through the jungle at them that were like little tiny
little pygmy.
Those are Topis. When we showed Josh that movie, he was just like, Topies! So granted, we don't get rules for Topis, but we do get spotlight on the lost city of Sinodicia. You get a simple map of the underground city, notes on how it was originally founded above ground, but when the inhabitants found an underground lake in the middle of the desert, they started building some stuff down there, and they started exploring more down there. They woken up an ancient demon of Zagron, who ended up taking over the civilization. Everybody stopped worshiping the other gods. They started a cult. They just sacrificed slaves and wanderers until like a group of adventurers showed up. They thought they defeated him. They just knocked him out. He woke up a couple months later, came back to power. So you have this setting, how the evil clerics keep control is there's the elixir of fantasy that they mix into the drinking water. So whenever you drink the water, you have to make a DC 15 plus how many weeks you've been drinking the water fortitude save, or you go into like a dreamlike state for 24 hour for 2d4 hours. You get -1 to your wisdom score, and you take a -2 on your initiative as well as saves versus illusion, because you're just like, hey man, this place is great to be. We're having great fun. Next article is Maztica. This was a South American-based setting, which was, instead of like the Oriental Adventure setting, gets a lot of hate because it leans heavily into stereotypes that were prevalent in old movies and stuff like that. It's not considered to be very PC because it's very much based on like bad kung fu movies, and it kind of like blends everything together. This setting was actually, they actually did real research. Like the guy who wrote everything actually went to Mexico. He talked with experts in Mexican culture, Aztec and Mayan civilizations, actually did the research, just didn't sit down and like, oh cool, let's watch kung fu movies and TV shows and make notes. So we got a new feat called armor dancing, as well as improved armor dancing. So if you're wearing one of those bright, colorful costume armors that's got a lot of dangling bits and colors and flashing stuff, if you're moving around, you can add, you can get a better AC bonus by using this distracting armor to your advantage to like confuse your opponent. And we get two prestige classes. They're both a different kind of knight. One is the Eagle Knight. The other one is the Jaguar Knight. They have a lot of similarities where they can take on the form of one of those two animals, depending on which one, and gain a lot of a bunch of magic spells and spell resistance to go with that. So it's kind of like their version of a paladin.
Yeah.
Next article, setting number 18 is one of those sub-factions of Ravenloft called the Mask of the Red Death. In this realm of Ravenloft, because the realms are all separated by transitory mist, so you can like walk from one to the other, but you have to go through like a little bit of a tiny plane shift, and they're sealed off from each other so you don't get things crossing over as much. This one is based on a Gothic Victoria England, where the heroes are people who use knowledge and enlightenment and wisdom to be able to fight the forces of evil. I was kind of reading this, and I've been watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel with Laura, and I'm like, oh my god! So I got the prestige class to make a Watcher. They get a lot of bonuses based on their intelligence when they're fighting the undead. So that one's kind of cool. Next setting number 19 is the Sundered Empire. Before Greyhawk, before Blackmoor, there was a miniatures war game called Chainmail, which actually, with third edition D&D, they actually went there. They reprinted, updated the rules, and started releasing a bunch of pewter minis before they did the plastic ones for the D&D miniatures game. So they brought Chainmail back. I actually have a one Chainmail mini I bought in the early 2000s. It's a little red dragon I got on a shelf behind me. It's the first ever mini I ever bought. It's actually not on this shelf behind me. It's on like the shelf over there that you can't see.
Yep.
But
it was I just tried looking around your head to see if I can see something.
Yeah. No, it was actually one of the first minis it was the first mini I ever bought, and I didn't put it together until I was in college, and I've used it for Red Dragon ever since. The Sundered Empire, you have all these different factions that are fighting each other, and they decided to focus on the Hobgoblin faction to give a prestige class for Hobgoblin clerics. They get 2-weapon fighting, so their god's preferred weapons is the longsword and the hand axe. So if you're member of this prestige class and you're armed with both of those, you're considered to have 2-weapon fighting while wielding those weapons. And then you get a little bit more powerful, and then you can make those weapons burst into flame. And then you can also get bonuses to damage when you're fighting goblins or fighting elves, because elves and goblins, hobgoblins, or some of the different factions in the game. The 20th setting that they put in here is not a classic setting. It's actually a preview setting, and this is the article Countdown to Eberron, which previews the new setting's action points. So they kind of took the idea of force points from the Star Wars RPG, because at this point they had released, I think they had released second edition, like not second edition, but they released their version of the Star Wars D20, and just like in the D6 version, which we are getting to as soon as we get through all of these Dragon magazines, you had force points, and for the Star Wars D20, you could use a force point to do a reroll or get some bonuses on stuff. In Eberron, it kind of was like a mix between like fifth editions, like inspiration dice, so you had your action point, which you could use to cast like metamagic feats. Not metamagic feats. I'm looking at the wrong one. So you can use extra use of a daily power. So if you had a thing that you can only do like 1 or 3 times a day, spend the action point, get an extra use of that per day power. Or you could recall a spell that you've cast that you can't remember anymore. If you were dying, you could use it to stabilize. So if you're like -2 hit points, you spend the action point to stop bleeding out. And there was feats, action feats. That's where you could like spend an action point and inspire somebody else based on what your action die was. And so it was like a whole little like they also like other games use like a luck point. You can kind of system. It was interesting and it was cool for Eberron. I think it actually like bled over into 4th edition a little bit. Then the last article in this, we usually get 3 different Wizards Workshop articles, but they used up a lot of space in this magazine, going through 20 different campaign settings. So all we get is a Sage Advice. This was their monthly FAQ column. So if you had a question, you wrote into Wizards and hoped that they answered it. You had much better luck calling the 800 number. And they wanted to talk about the theme for this issue was spells and magic items. 2 big takeaway question answers that I found in here is that you can't use metamagic feats when casting from a staff. The only thing that the staff looks at is your caster level, so you can't quicken or maximize a spell that you're casting through a staff because you haven't memorized and like mentally amped it up. So no using those metamagic feats when you're casting with a staff. And yeah, no matter what, you must pay the 5,000 EXP cost for any wish spell that is cast.
Okay.
So that means even like oh no, because that would be like it's cast. But again, like I talked about that earlier, it's like if you're giving somebody access to the wish through a magical item, like a Ring of 3 Wishes, totally be like, yeah, you're gonna lose like 5,000 experience points for this, right? Yeah, so that was a quick history and tour of some of the most popular D&D settings of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
Yeah.
Although I think so, like mine and Josh's setting, because a lot of the books that we had between the two of us are heavily inspired by the Mystara, Dragonlance, and the Oriental Adventure setting. Like our friend Rich and his family had the Dark Sun, like all the Dark Sun books, but none of us ever wanted to like actually play the whole like we're gonna suck out the life force from the world around us to cast magic. We didn't want to go dark with the Dark Sun. But one of the first D&D books I actually had is and I reviewed it again. It's one of the stuff I earlier reviewed back with Laura on the channel was the Creature Catalog, which was the monster manual of Mystara. It has like a slew of like weird, interesting, never really got reprinted monsters such as the Topi, the Witch Lamp, which is a like glowing orb. If you try casting spells at it, they can either be like deflected back at you or expanded out around it. Like they do not. It's like any spell you cast on it is not going to affect it, but it's either going to affect you or like blow back and hit the rest of the party. So they're kind of cool little like supplemental monsters for someone to keep around as a pet. So if they're like fireball, it's like, uh-oh. All right, that's all I've got for this week.
Yeah. We can correlate a lot of anime cartoons that we had in the 80s to D&D.
Either inspiring it or being directly inspired by it.
Yeah.
So out of all the settings that I listed, which one do you think would be your favorite to play in?
I would want to try I want to call it Grayskull. No. Greyhawk, yeah. I would actually want to try that.
I believe in the second edition books that I gave back to Josh, I think I got one of the Greyhawk Gazetteers. It's actually like the timeline book for events going on in Greyhawk. It's a little small book. It's not a big book. It's a small book.
Yeah, that's somewhere.
Yeah.
That's probably somewhere.
It probably is.
Yeah. He's got some of his books down here. Not all of them.
Yeah. Because I had in my possession, I had that Gazetteer and I had the Oriental Adventures. I still got to get his AD&D first edition player's handbook back to him when I get up there. I got to make sure to pack that for when I come up this summer. So he was all like, review this. And I'm like, I don't need any more to review. He's like, review this. So I had to bring it down and review it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me.
Not a problem. I'm glad I could do it.
And to everyone else viewing, thank you for joining us. And I will say peace.
Peace. See y'all next week.
Hey everybody, thanks for staying till the end of the episode. Remember to like, share, subscribe. Follow us on Facebook at Board Barista Productions. And if you want to support us, Patreon link at the bottom.